Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host Paul Rook, and as always we are joined by the delectable Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hello guys.
Delectable?
Yeah, delectable.
Oh, you sound like a chocolate
Oh dear, he's been eating the chocolate really a lot. Oh,
Yeah.
there's another
Well,
way of
it's
looking
Christmas.
at that.
It's Christmas, everyone likes chocolate.
Well, we're getting close, aren't we?
It's my favourite season.
Oh yeah, tell us about it.
Oh yeah, season of Christmas movies on the telly, and they're all just as bad as each other.
I thought you'd be into them, Paul.
No, not me.
So first question on the table.
This time of season, the season, I prefer humbugs.
Well, first question on the table then is Die Hard a Christmas movie or not?
Yes, it's a Christmas movie. Everyone knows that.
Richard?
Yeah, it's usually when it's on, isn't it?
Yep. And what is your favourite Christmas movie?
Krampus.
Okay, Richard?
Not that I go for Christmas movies. I don't tend to watch them, but I did see one a couple. It's a few years old now. Polar Express. I quite like.
Oh, that's a good movie.
Okay.
I've not seen Krampus, but Polar Express is good. Mine is The Good Life. Not The Good Life.
Right.
Yeah,
Krampus is a horror movie.
I can't even remember the title of it. What is it? The Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life. Oh my God.
Okay.
It's a Good Life. I suddenly went to 1970s sitcom. No, It's a Wonderful Life with.
I must admit, I do like Elf as well. That's quite funny. Yeah, Will Ferrell. He's quite funny, that bloke.
Yeah, you can't knock a bit of old Will Ferrell, can you?
No,
Really, it's quite funny.
not.
Anyway, boys, what are we talking about this week?
Christmas movies.
No.
Oh, I don't know. Would it be Cemeteries by any chance, Perry?
It is. We're going very gothic and doom and gloom and Victorian again, which you love a bit of Victoria.
Now you could have gone from Christmas movies straight into Cemeteries with Scrooge.
I could have done. Why?
Yeah.
Actually,
you missed that link. Well,
that's not set in a cemetery.
The Ghost of Christmas Present. No, Future. He takes him to the cemetery and there's a big gravestone, and it says, Ebenezer Scrooge, and he pushes him down the grave.
Oh, right. Is that the Bill Murray version?
No, it's an older version. That's one of the older.
Probably
that's
the
why I
Muppet
don't
version.
know it.
Yeah, terrible.
The Muppet version.
No film education whatsoever.
Anyway,
going on from Ebenezer Scrooge to Cemeteries. Carry on, Terry.
Okay, we're talking about cemeteries. We are talking all about Victorian London. So we have to look at what was actually going on in London at the time as to what makes what we're going to talk about quite relevant, because there was a lot of crap going on, basically. It wasn't a pleasant place to live in.
Very crowded, wasn't it? They were all living on top of each other by the sounds of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very, very crowded.
Very on the twist.
And that would have a knock-on effect to sort of space to actually sort of lay the deceased to rest, wouldn't it?
Very much so. Basically, in 50 years, the population in London doubled to 2.5 million people. And that's a lot of people. That's like a huge explosion of population within London. And in London at that time, there was only 200 graveyards. So on top of that, you've got really crap living conditions. Mm-hmm. We're talking the hardest of the hardest living conditions. You had super cold weather. You had sanitary stuff was not really considered. Mm-hmm. We didn't have like the sewage network that we have now. We didn't have running water in homes, so people weren't washing like they would normally. People weren't cleaning their houses. They didn't have houses that we recognise today. Yeah, all right, so you can get Victorian terrace houses now, but they're done up, they're nice, right? But the actual inside, there weren't electrics. It was very dirty fuel, coal. It was very heavy in pollution. The streets weren't like paved like they are today. They were cobbled streets still. So when you add all these up, there's still a lot of horses around. They're mucking up the streets. So it's a very dirty, dirty place, London, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
It was very-
Polluted and dirty and cramped and poor living conditions all add up to what, guys?
Disease.
Disease.
Yeah,
One of the
disease was
main
right.
diseases that was around at the time was cholera.
Yeah, which is waterborne, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
well,
think you get it from contaminated wells, don't you?
yeah, not just that, but contaminated water sources in general, bearing in mind a lot of the sewage waste and stuff was just being pumped into the rivers around there at the time, just go and dump it in the river or whatever. It just was horrendous. And not only that, but you've got massive pollution going on with these coal fires that just, well, even more recently, think of that smog that we had
Yeah.
in the early 19th century. It was like it's so thick that you could cut it with a knife kind of scenario. And that was
Yeah.
because of like dirty fuel, basically. So London was a very dirty, stinky, unsanitary place.
It was, and also, I mean, you walk around London today and you don't really know, but underneath the city of London there are still rivers flowing,
Hmm.
and they were basically there in the Victorian period.
Hmm.
That's what London was. London today is sort of built up a bit higher.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's still lots of rivers now that people just walk over and they don't realise
Yeah.
they're still there.
Yeah, and all these water sources were just being crammed up with crap, basically rubbish. Now, life
Literally.
expectancy, yeah, literally, life expectancy was incredibly short, and infant mortality was incredibly high. So, you're not looking at living. I mean, nowadays, what if someone gets to 80 or 90 years of age? We go, oh, they lived a good life, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Back then, the average life expectancy, and this was a good life, they lived to a ripe old age kind of life, was around about 44, 45.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be
right.
dead, mate.
Oh, we'd
Yep.
be long gone, wouldn't we?
I'd be ready to go.
Mm.
Yeah, you'll be on your last legs. Me and Richard will be long gone.
Yeah. I'd be doing the show all on my own.
You would. You'd be like, hi, it's just me. I'm delectable today.
Yeah, that's it. Today we'll be talking about how disgusting it was that Richard and Kerry went too early.
Far too early. And
Far
are they
too
there on the
early,
Ouija
yeah.
board? And
Cut
there's
down
two
on the
people
prime.
going.
Totally out of order of them.
Exactly right. So
Yeah.
this is like, when you think about it, these conditions and this, so when people died, which there was a lot of people dying at a high rate as well when you had epidemics going on, bearing in mind around that time in the 1842s, there was a massive cholera epidemic. People are dying a rapid rate, 200 graveyards. Now, this is before the days of cremation as well. So it was all
Yeah.
burial.
Mhm.
Yeah. In 200 graveyards, there isn't space to bury people. So
No.
there was a massive issue in regards to space. So, oh gosh, some of the things we're going to tell you are absolutely horrendous, but they happened, and they happened because of the social situation everybody was in at that time. And some of the practices that happened were pretty gross, quite frankly. And unless you had money, there's no dignity in death, basically,
No, definitely not.
unless you had money. And then that's a different one. So they would talk about, they would cram bodies in on burial sites. They would
Yeah.
literally dig them up for dissection. We had, we've talked about body snatching before. So we talked about some of the gangs that were doing that. But you also had the grave diggers and the clergy, in some instances, going, that's a fresh one, and selling those bodies on just to make room in their graveyards. It was horrendous, absolute
Yeah.
huge overcrowded problem, not just in living, but in the death as well.
Yeah.
Now, in Dickens' Bleak House, it kind of sums it up in bleak house, right? He said Tom All Alone's was one of the most overcrowded burial grounds in London. Below the line of buildings, by 1839, the burial ground had reached the first floor windows of the neighbouring houses.
Can you imagine it?
That's horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I find it insulting that you actually quoted Charles Dickens there and you don't even know there's a graveyard in Scrooge.
There was a reference to a graveyard in Scrooge. It didn't feature heavily. That's all I'm saying.
Not the point.
The version I know isn't kind of not the Charles Dickens version, I'm sure.
Yeah. Not Bill Murray.
It's the Bill Murray one.
did it.
I don't think he took it direct script from Charles Dickens to you. No. There you go.
Oh dear. Anyway, carry on. You're doing well.
Okay. So, when you think about that now, we know Dickens, he wrote about conditions that he was seeing in London and in, the Old Curiosity Shop and in other books that he's written. There are places that are known as that's how he took his inspiration from, right?
Mm-hmm.
We learned that Hal Cooper.
Yeah.
So, when you look at Dickens, you kind of get the snapshot of what, how hard life was in that particular period of time, because that's what he was seeing and that's what he was writing about. And although he set that into a fictional story, he was taking his inspiration from life around him, basically. So when he's saying that there were overcrowded burial grounds in London, he was right. There were. Whether or not they were that extreme to reach a first floor window of neighbouring houses, I don't know, but there was obviously a recognition of the massive overcrowding.
Mm-hmm.
Now, basically, this reached its peak in the late 1830s, and the Weekly Dispatch recorded this statement: "Here in this place of Christian burial, you may see human heads covered with hair, and here in this consecrated ground are human heads with flesh still adhering to them. On the north side, a man was digging a grave. He was quite drunk, so indeed were all the grave diggers we saw." Hardly surprising, though, under the conditions they're working in.
Well, yeah, I suppose you needed to fortify yourself before you actually went out for a day's work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a famous meme, isn't there, that goes around on the socials saying, like, if you was paid £5,000 a night to work in a cemetery, would you do so? Now, yes, you would.
Yeah. That's what I would.
Back then, maybe you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, we actually know someone that actually does live in a graveyard.
We certainly do.
Yeah. And they seem to be all right on it.
They have a lovely time of it. They love it, don't they?
Yeah.
Incredibly private.
Oh, absolutely.
At night.
Yeah, people are dying to see him.
Ooh, the bad joke.
But no, they do enjoy it, and they said the only thing they find weird is when they come back from shopping and they are unpacking their bags and there's a funeral in the graveyard.
Yeah. This, of course, is Sean and Bex Reynolds from Ghost Dimensions.
Yep.
Yeah, who we interviewed a little while ago.
We'll give them a plug.
Give them a little plug. They're still going strong and full of fun and frolics. In fact, have you seen his mystic, or is it called Septic Peg or something?
Oh, I don't know, but they're mad, aren't they?
Mad as a hatter. Mad as an absolute hatter. Great fun. But yeah, they live in a cemetery, graveyard, and they love it. Yeah. In fact, a few people I know live near or like next to. Doesn't Jo Trehearn live next to a
graveyard? Yes, she does. Yeah.
I think her house backs onto it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because she often puts in a social feed, got a new neighbour today. And
yeah. Bless her. But so, when you talk about it now, we have a very different perspective of graveyards. We almost look at them quite fondly, don't we? We they're a place of peace and solitude and reflection, actually. Whereas back then, you wouldn't want to be in one for love nor money. You wouldn't go and sit and have your lunch in a graveyard because you're going to be literally eating with bones around you.
Yeah, or
So
I
I
suppose.
don't know. I sort of disagree with that. I mean, if you are going to be visiting a loved one that's passed and buried, then yeah, you might want to go and sit and have lunch with them. I know people that do go to a cemetery and just sit there.
Yeah, but we're talking back then,
But
back in the
as just a like member of the Joe public who hasn't got anyone there, then no.
I see you have very strong opinions on this.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, see, I'm very different in my opinion to this than you, Paul.
Yeah.
But let's go back to Victorian and carry on with that until we get into that particular little discussion at the end, I feel. So in 1822, a very naughty Baptist minister, Mr. House, actually opened a chapel and a vault known as Ennan Chapel over an open sewer on St. Clement's Lane near the Strand. Was there at the weekend, by the way. Now, this is pretty disgusting, really. The residents in that area became quite quickly aware that there was really, I mean, when they say appalling smells, it must have been bad because London smelt bad anyway then.
Mm-hmm.
And the rat population went up tremendously, right? There was like a little epidemic of rats. And basically, the air was so bad that even, like, you know, they didn't have refrigerators, they had parlours. Things would go rotten really quickly in that area, a lot quicker than they would in other areas.
Yeah, it says the sort of meat would rot within hours because back then, because the butchers would have just hung the meat up, wouldn't they, in the shop and outside the shop would have hung the meat up for. Oh dear.
Yeah, there would have been a lot more bacteria around and microbes in the air and stuff. But obviously they didn't understand that at the time.
No.
So that's why that sort of happened. But it also begs the question that if we did eventually be able to time travel and you went back to that period, would we be able to breathe?
We would be able to survive.
Yeah.
I don't think we would.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about our immune systems, but our immune systems are used to a very sanitized environment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this is not a sanitized environment. This is freaking disgusting. I mean, it's that bad that the local children, but there were bugs and flies obviously crawling out of the coffins and vaults, right? They would call them body bugs.
Awesome.
That's terrible. Now, of this particular church, the congregation would regularly faint because of the smell, right?
Yeah, the sermons were just boring. That's what
God, it must have been alright.
I want to get out of this. Oh, I feel faint. Oh.
I think it could be the stench and everything, and to find the cause of the problem in this particular area, authorities discovered in 1839 because they wanted to replace the open sewer basically. So they wanted, you know, and to find the cause of this problem, right? They found that all the bodies that have been buried in the years had actually gone down into this area, this sewer. But they reckon there was 12,000 corpses over there over the course of the years in there. 12,000 corpses in an open sewer. That's disgusting. That's why he was able to find, you know, do cheaper funeral services than its rivals. That particular thing, because you know, everybody else was charging premiums because of the space in there. So he's going, I've got an open sewer. It's great. I just chuck them in now. The workmen found huge numbers of decomposing corpses, right? Separated from the living congregation by just a few centimeters of soil or floorboards. So he'd literally built over it. So he'd like, and then was just chucking bodies under there just to decompose. Oh my God, it just doesn't even bear thinking about. It really doesn't. He didn't even like put them down there in coffins. He would empty the coffins and the wood he used the house for his own fire. This was Reverend House, in his own fire. So beautiful, right? I've got a free source of firewood for myself, and it's cleaner than coal. Woohoo! In the old coffins. The bodies are disposed of underneath, just in the open sewer, and he dumped a bit of quicklime on them to speed it up a bit quicker on the decomposition. But oh my God, they just festered in this sewer. And then when it got too much, he would get a cart and chuck loads of the remains in the Thames if it got too full up in there.
Nice. Well, I suppose makes sense, doesn't it?
So the decomposing bodies, and then, if it gets too full under there, he'll just, cart up, chuck them in the Thames, yeah?
Yeah.
Right? Or in the landfill for Waterloo Bridge.
And then they get washed up on Canvey Island at Dead Man's Cove.
Occasionally they did.
Yeah.
Occasionally they did. Now, the authorities did close the chapel. They did vault over the sewer, but they didn't remove the rest of the bodies that were under there.
Right.
The chapel was renamed and rented to a sect who held tea dances, fancy dress balls and gambling, and they exploited the macabre history by advertising dances on the dead. Now that is a marketing opportunity.
That's quite clever, really.
Yep, because they all wanted to do that.
There is actually, I've seen an advertisement where they've got like a snapshot of, a glass thing that you could look down and see the dead underneath there.
Yeah, but I mean, the Victorians were very into the death and spiritualism and stuff.
They did have a very different view of it to what we do now. I think partly that comes from the high death toll at the time, the high death rate. They had a lot of more of a closer relationship, I would say, with death than we did. We talked about spirit photography last week, didn't we, where they took photographs with their dead. And we were talking about that as a way of remembrance.
Yeah.
And I think respect wasn't there. Once you're dead, they kind of recognise that it's just a physical remain. It's not the person. Whereas now we get confused. We get very confused that the person is still there and it's not. It's just their meat body. Their flesh and bones. Their spirit isn't there. But the relationship with death and dying was very different back in the Victorian period, and partly, as I say, it was an expectation, whereas now it's the one sure thing in life, right? Isn't it? They say there's there's
death and taxes, isn't it?
Death and taxes. There's the only two things you can guarantee in life. Everything else is a magical mystery tour of what you're going to get.
But then even when you die, you're still taxed on it.
Well, the people that are left behind are taxed on your death. You personally aren't taxed.
Your stuff, though.
Yeah, by then it's already passed to somebody else, so it's not officially yours.
Yeah.
So the minute you die, it's done, right? But I think our relationship with it now is we see it almost as a personal affront.
Yeah.
Whereas back then, it was an expectation. And although we should expect to die, we kind of don't expect until we're at a grand old age. Now, if our grand old age was 45 or 50, we would view it very differently. Because like we said at the beginning of the show, me and Richard wouldn't be here now.
Yeah, it's just inconsiderate.
And you would be coming up to the end of your life.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to the rest.
You get enough rest, boy. You get enough rest.
Well, I do now. I wouldn't have then.
In 1842, the government actually decided to do something about this problem. And, there are huge scandals going on around this time, obviously, about things. I mean, that is not acceptable in any kind of situation, in my view. Do you know what I mean? But, there is scandal upon scandal. They've got waves of epidemic of diseases going on in these areas, so something has to be done. And this overcrowd...
I think it was more to do with the fact that, I don't know, someone that living in the country lived longer than people living in the towns.
Well, there was that too.
Yeah, so I think that's what was like, hang on a minute, he's living longer and they're getting more work out of him, so why is it happening here?
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, you kind of have to take the emotional side out of it and look at it Governments will only do something if it is financially beneficial, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I hate to say it, but that is kind of how it works. We're for the good of the people. Crap. No.
Yeah.
They will do it for the good of the well-being of the country as a whole, not individual causes per se.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, looking at the research, there's like a table in there, and it says like a labourer, say for example, in what was it? Yeah, I think it was a Bolton labourer. The life expectancy rate was 18.
Yeah. Think about the area though.
Yeah.
Bolton, a lot of mining.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's
But then
hardly
someone in
industrial.
Rutland, for example, their life expectancy was 38.
Yeah.
So they get 20 more years out of that one.
More farmland.
Yeah.
I would say. I don't know Rutland particularly well, but I would say that's more farmland, whereas
Well,
Bolton
yeah, I mean, in that
Lancashire,
particular
isn't it?
period, I would have thought it'd be quite maybe a small village or something.
Yeah. That's terrible, really, isn't it?
Yeah, 20 years longer.
Yeah.
Just think of how much work you could get out of him.
That's in labouring.
Yeah.
That's physical labour. But think about, so then look at the flip side, professional trades. So you're looking at professional trades, I would say, would be more lawyers and accountants and academics, so that side of things, yeah?
Yeah.
Again, 52 is the highest age.
Absolutely, but it's still 20 years. It is literally across the board. People will live in 20 years longer on Rutland than they were in Bolton, for example.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. In tradesman, it was 23 from Bolton, 41 from Rutland. So, you have got that 20-year gap, really.
Yeah. It is crazy. It was quite shocking when I looked at those figures. Now, that particular table that you're looking at, Paul, was actually compiled by a guy called Edwin Chadwick. Now, he was basically a public health reformer, and he had his people that weren't very happy with what he was saying in Parliament. He ended up being sacked from Parliament because he was so outspoken about things. But it's actually thanks to him that they decided to do something about the problem to do with the sanitary conditions of the labouring population of Great Britain. His report is actually called the Report on the Sanitary Conditions of Labouring Population of Great Britain, because of this death rate, because he compiled this, and the results are they're absolutely crazy when you look at that. I reread it. I was reading it and thinking, is that working years? So 52 working years. And then you think, okay, you might have 10 years on before you started work, the age of 10, start work, right? And then you might have a little bit on the other end. No, that is the age. That is how many years on this planet you're on. Do you know what I mean? That is not, and it's actually sobering when you look at that.
Exactly. I mean, just think of that 18-year-old. How does he get?
That's life expectancy.
I know.
It's crazy.
Gets to 18 and then he wants a rest. I suppose
18, you're dead, mate.
That's typical of some of the 18-year-olds at the moment, isn't it, I think?
But look at Liverpool. The labourers is 15. That's the average age. 15. Yeah. My son just hit 15. Yeah. He's gone. He's done. He's out of here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, awful. At the age of 15, they've got their mobile phones now and they're not interested in working. So
I wouldn't say that. There's a lot of 15-year-olds that I would like to work, but are stopped because of employment laws now.
Well, yeah. But they're still on their phones.
I started work at 14. It was only a Saturday job because I was in education, obviously. But at 14, I was working.
Yeah, I think I had a paper round at 15.
Yeah, Richard?
Yeah, paper round. I had about that when I was 15.
Yeah.
14,
well, I say I had a paper round. What I used to do is get the papers, and I had about 3 or 4 rounds, and then I'd pay my brother to go and do the rounds while I folded them all up for him.
And that says the life and times of Paul Rook.
Entrepreneur, I think the phrase is. Manager at 15.
Oh, for God's sakes.
They earn a good wage.
And a lot of it, anyway, back to death rates, a lot of this actually comes because we had a massive industrial revolution. And if you look at the large towns, they're the big industrial towns.
Yeah,
and
they
the
are,
working
yeah.
conditions within the industrial landscape at that time. Think of the cotton mills.
Yep.
A lot of them would employ little children to go amongst the, like the, there's a name for them, isn't there? The weave things.
Yeah, the looms.
The looms. Thank you,
That's
Richard.
right, yeah.
And quite often they'd get little kids with their little hands would be ideal because they would be able to fit between the looms while they're working, right? And pick out the threads and stuff that were clogging up the machine and do that sort of thing. And they were employed specifically. So the younger, the better. And horrendous. You shouldn't.
Absolutely. Even chimney sweeps.
Yeah, chimney sweeps.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Going up the chimneys.
Yeah,
getting
they often
stuck.
need to send kids up.
And it would be the little kids because they would fit. You get to a certain age, you can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Or you get stuck up a chimney because you've grown too big and you got left up there. Not to mention, dirty coal, chimneys.
Yeah, coal fires, chimneys, course, yeah. I can remember when we used to have the chimney sweep come around ours. We used to, back in the day. I mean, it's not that long ago, thinking about it, but
yeah, but you wouldn't have had a child.
Ethical. There's no ethical working conditions going on.
No, but it did come about eventually, but yeah, they did try and ban it, but a lot of stately home owners would still employ children direct.
Mm-hmm. Stable boy. When you think about it, Chadwick's report actually led to setting up of the Royal Commission, and then that went on to the Public Health Act of 1848, and he became one of the commissioners of that. Mm-hmm. But he was very outspoken, he was very rude, and he's very provocative with what he said. And in 1854, he was forced to retire. # they sacked him. Time for you to go, boy. And there was a letter that was sent to the Times to explain why he was so unpopular, considering the reforms he was pushing through were good for the people. He wasn't popular. And this was the letter that was written. They said, "We prefer to take our chance with cholera than be bullied into health. There is nothing a man hates so much as being cleaned against his will, or having his floor swept, his hall whitewashed, his dung heaps cleared away, and his thatch forced to give way to slate. It is a fact that many people have died from a good washing." Oh my God, is all I can say to that.
Oh well. Washing.
Yeah, if you have a wash, you're cleaning all the protective oils off you, and it lowers your immune system if you're obsessive about it.
No, there's a level, isn't there? I mean, I think you've got to be sensible about it.
If you're one of these obsessive people that have to wash like 8 times a day or whatever, then it can cause more harm than good.
You didn't have bathrooms in your house, though. This is all outside taps.
No, that's true.
I mean, you've got to go back to the days. Now, even my dad remembers this. Now, my dad's in his 70s now, right? He remembers. Now, bearing in mind, it was his mum and dad and 6 children in my dad's house when he was growing up. Yeah. So they would, on a Friday, that was wash night. And they would have a big bath. The water was heated. And every member of the family bathed in that water. So if you're the youngest, you were last.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you took your bath in everybody else's dirt. So you getting clean, really? Not really. You're not, are you?
No, but again, you're also building up your immune system by doing that.
Didn't have deodorants.
No.
Didn't have any of these potions and lotions we buy.
Probably. At the very most, just a block of carbolic or coal tar soap, I suppose.
Mind you, didn't going back a few more years from the Victorian period, a lot of people had like those white faces because the smell was so bad. They used to put it was almost like talcum powder or something.
No, that was lead because the fashion was to have very, very pale skin. The paler, the better, was more
I thought it was
attractive.
something to do with the smell and stuff.
They would carry pomanders around and hold them to their nose.
Okay, that'd be it
That's
then.
what they would do.
Yeah, you're talking, a long time before this, the Regency era.
Was with the white, but that was lead, and that lead poisoning.
And even,
oh my God!
During the plague, the smells were so bad. You had those doctors, didn't you, with those big snout masks?
Mm-hmm.
And that
the old quack doctors. Yeah.
They would pack that full of herbs and spices and dried flowers and camphor.
Yeah, so they smelt nice. They looked scary as hell, but
very much so.
Yeah, if you're like delirious and you woke up and see that peering over you, you'd shuffle off the morgue coil, wouldn't you?
Well, that comes down to they believed a lot of diseases were airborne. They didn't link that to sanitary causes. Do you know what I mean? They would think it was just airborne.
They often ended up in the graveyards.
They often ended up in the graveyards.
Yeah,
now there was
it back to graveyards there to see that. That was good, wasn't it?
I did. I loved it. Saw the segue there. Now, during the cholera epidemic of 1848 to 1849, Chadwick actually ordered the replacement of the traditional brick sewers with his self-flushing glazed pipes in hope of conveying the sewage to farmers for use as manure. Which, unfortunately, guys, if you think your food, lovely, going back into the food chain, gotta love it, right? But that is to be fair, that's no different. They still muck the fields with animal wastage or
they do,
treated sewage.
Because human wastage isn't suitable for putting on fields, I don't think. I don't know why.
I think it's probably down to the chemicals we use.
Yeah, probably.
Nowadays.
Yeah. But isn't this sort of the period where they started putting in toilets, maybe not inside the house, but outside?
Outside.
Because I think they was like, I'm not having that dirty thing in my house. And then, up came the outhouses.
I think what you've got to also consider is, back in the day, you've gone from the Industrial Revolution. It happened. It was, again, one of those explosions in society. So you've gone from very rudimentary living, farmhouse living with, nothing really becoming a problem, a massive explosion in the population, and then a lot of mechanical things coming in. Think about how people didn't like the idea of gas lights inside their house. Or electric. That wasn't safe. I mean, it wasn't really compared to now, but things like this, these innovations coming through, the steam power that created a massive of mass manufacture as well.
Yeah,
rather than hand woven. Yeah, and people do fight change. We've seen that evident in recent times. You know what I mean? A simple thing. Wear a mask, right?
Yeah.
People have fought that left, right, and centre in the UK, I would say. I can only comment on the UK. I can't comment on other countries. But from what I've witnessed and what I've seen, people have fought that tooth and nail. That is a tiny change compared to a massive society change of the Industrial Revolution.
That's right, yeah.
So to then introduce sanitary things like outside toilets and, changing how you build something, like a house with thatched roofs. No. Let's put slate on it because of all the crap that gets built up in a thatched roof. And fire-wise, not particularly safe, right? It all becomes, engineers at the time thought that Chadwick was actually overstepping his boundaries, basically. And all he was actually trying to do was try to get rid of poverty-stricken areas, the filth that they were living in. He wanted the sewerage to be basically filtered direct from houses straight into the Thames. Tidal goes out with the water. If we forget, it comes back, right? Because it actually led to extreme contamination of the Thames itself, right?
Yeah.
But that's sort of like the next step in the logic of man at the time. yes, it's more sanitary not to live around it. Get rid of it into a water source that's going out, taking it away, not really recognizing it's going to come back, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those, isn't it? Ports these days, we go to a port, a seaport, yeah, very clean, the water, as relatively speaking, this is. You know what I mean? We can look down, we can see it's generally not got much rubbish in it, maybe a little bit, but not a lot. Seaports back in those days were like basically everything and anything got chucked in it.
Yeah. You can see, can't you?
You know what I mean? They just dump it in there. Want to get rid of a body? Dump it in the Thames. Want to commit suicide? Dump in the Thames. Do you know what I mean? It's like those sort of things. It was normal practice, and you're changing somebody's normal practice into. We're much more, I would say, resilient to that because we have tech changes every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
We run with the changes probably a lot more quicker than they would have done back then.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chadwick and a guy called George Alfred Walker wrote a report on a particular street in London. It was Portugal Street. Basically, they said it was a mass of putrefaction. The soil was saturated in it, and the odour was so offensive that people could never have their windows open. Right? Now, Chadwick's best-selling sanitary report in 1842 stated that there were annually 20,000 adults and 30,000 youths and children who were imperfectly interred in less than 218 acres of burial ground space, closely surrounded by the abodes of the living.
Yeah.
He's asking for a complete reform of living conditions and how we dispose of the dead, basically. Now, he spoke against vaults. He said that sooner or later, the decomposition in vaults would be that the air will be breathed as if you're living in a coffin.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we think of St. Clement Danes Church, which is on the Strand, the entrance to the vault near the communion table. Basically, every time that got opened, the smell of decomposing flesh was that bad. And also, when you open an enclosed space, you get like a backdraft of air coming out of it. It sort of like builds up all these chemical reactions.
Yeah.
Within
I
a
suppose
dead
it could
body.
get quite combustible in some crypts. I mean, it probably wasn't that unusual for something to perhaps explode.
Yeah. So you would open the door and this crappy air would come out, and they said it was bad enough to extinguish candles nearby. Now, the sexton, the job of a sexton was to tap coffins to let out the noxious gases, right? Those noxious gases would be the ones that detonated if they weren't released. And in the 1800s, there were cases of corpse gases exploding in coffins and fires raging for days underneath London churches because of this.
Right.
How awful.
Yeah.
When you think about it, I mean, we're building up a pretty gross picture, aren't we, here?
We are, aren't we? And I bet the barbecues were rubbish.
Ugh, I didn't have barbecues back in the day.
Well, they did in the churches, apparently.
We didn't have gardens like we have now. I mean, people take great pride in their gardens, but gardens were like an external dumping ground for the house.
Yeah.
Have it for your waste, really, weren't they? Your garden. That's why Victorian garden, they dig up people's gardens these days and find layers of people's debris over the years, because it's basically you had a compost heap or a crap heap out the back, didn't you? And that's all that was for. Whereas now we have barbecues and we have gazebos and we have hot tubs and we have beautiful, landscape, mini landscapes, little gardens that we take great pride in, or most of us do. I don't, but most people do. You know what I mean? And it's all wonderful. Whereas like back then, a garden, properties didn't have gardens. They would have a yard, and in the yard you would have, it was like it was your own personal garbage heap, basically.
Yep.
Chuck it out the window onto the garbage heap. Didn't have dustmen. Dustman didn't come round once a week.
Right.
You think about it, it's little things that we take for granted they didn't have. So it all just got chucked into the streets. You would have to, if they were, the maids would chuck the nighttime expulsions, your wee and your poo, out the window into the street.
You go for it.
Very true.
What period of history was it that they had to have the lords and ladies, if they were walking in the streets, they would have like raised shoes?
Yeah.
And there'd be planks that you would walk on because you couldn't walk on the ground because it was so bad, so dirty.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they were doing that in the Elizabethan period, weren't they? Chucking things out.
Yeah, that's a a long time before this period we're talking about. But yeah, old habits die hard, don't they?
Exactly. So anyway, in 1830, a letter was actually printed in the Morning Advertiser from a landscape gardener, basically. J.C. Loudon suggested several burial grounds within an equal radius to central London to be made, almost like a botanical garden, but there was actually burial grounds. Right. And this was all to do with the burial reform.
Yeah.
And he said that he actually took his inspiration from France, believe it or not. He'd visited France and seen some of the amazing burial grounds that he'd seen over there. And he sort of said, that's what we need. We need more burial space. We need to do this. And if we do it just outside London, accessible to London, but, in equal spacing around London, we can sort of alleviate this pressure of the London, burial problem that we've got.
Yeah.
I mean, he was such a vigorous campaigner. He actually suggested that cremation would become legal 40 years, would become legal, and 40 years later it did.
Yeah.
Right.
He's certainly ahead of his time, then.
He was very much ahead of his time, and he's actually the main person that was responsible for changing the appearance of London's gardens by suggesting the planting of plane trees, sycamores, almonds that would survive the city's sooty atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Up to then, we'd had a lot of pines and firs, evergreens, but they just gave us dark canopies, whereas it became a much more fresher, environmentally friendly, pleasant feel with these lighter trees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, architects and planners did take his advice, and joint stock companies were formed to basically build these new cemeteries, right? So it's become recognised that this is a major issue. So they did stock companies, so you could buy stock in them, and it was a practical solution compared to some of the other ideas that were flouted around at the time. The government basically put forward a giant pyramid on top of Primrose Hill that would have been taller than St Paul's Cathedral, but would have been able to have housed 5,000 corpses.
Right.
Okay.
That was put forward by Thomas Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, can you imagine how that would dominate the London skyline now?
Oh, it certainly would have done, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But think how, we say how quickly would that have been filled?
That, I think it'd be really quick, wouldn't it? But then at the end of the day, nowadays it would probably be turned into flats.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably not wrong there, honey. Now, the Victorians actually had a fascination for all things Egyptian. Now, Brightlingsea in East Sussex actually has a pyramid tomb solely for the occupancy of Mad Jack Fuller. That's a local 22 stone. He was a 22 stone eccentric, and his corpse is sitting on an iron chair with a roast chicken and a glass of port in front of him while he awaits the resurrection. And Wilson, the guy who put this forward was Thomas Wilson, and that's sort of where he got his idea from, was that particular tomb. Now, he actually went onto the board of the General Cemetery Company that was responsible for the one at Kinsell Green. That's one of the great 7 cemeteries that we're going to go on to talk about. So, when you start looking at the people involved, wild and wacky idea. Wow, in East Sussex, we've got this tomb of this guy who's 22 stone. He's like, sitting there on the throne. He's got a chicken. He's waiting for the afterlife with his goblet of wine. It just sounds like a really good idea to give to all the people in London, 5 million of them, on top of Primrose Hill. Let's build a big pyramid. Here we go.
Yeah.
Seriously. Now, a clause was added. Oh, sorry, I've jumped ahead. In 1832, the Parliament passed a bill to encourage the establishment of private new cemeteries, resulting in the 7 immense suburban cemeteries known as the Magnificent Seven. And this has actually been quite a theme, actually, over the years. We keep coming up with this. Every time we do a research, this Magnificent Seven somewhere kind of gets mentioned or referenced to.
Yeah.
So this is why we're doing this show, because this is something that kind of is accessible as well to us. We can still go and see some of these cemeteries, and they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. Now, these were, as I say, these were all built by joint stock companies. So these are a lot of people investing in them. And a clause was actually added so that the clergy would actually get a burial fee from the new cemeteries to compensate for the loss of what they were losing within London themselves. Say you was, I don't know, say you lived in Tower Hamlets, and normally your church would get that burial, but it then gets taken to one of the Great Seven. That church would get a fee for that. So like for me, my church, the one that I'm like logged with, as it were, is St. Nicholas's, right, on Canby Island. Now, I wouldn't be buried at St. Nicholas's because they haven't got a graveyard. I would be buried probably, if I was to be buried, say Southend Cemetery, or Pitsea. I'd be in one of them too.
Yeah.
St. Nick's would get a fee because I'm under their banner.
Because you're in their parish,
Exactly.
a
That's my
parishioner.
parish. Yeah. They would get a fee for me, even though I'm not buried there. I'm buried somewhere else. So those places weren't losing out by having these cemeteries. That's a fantastic incentive to use the external cemeteries. Saves them the hassle. Yeah, all right, they might have to journey to do the actual ceremony, but ultimately it's taken care of. They haven't got to worry about their overburdened graveyard and where the hell are they going to put me?
Yeah.
Basically. Now, this is where we see Victorian masterminded revolutionary, basically. There were solutions, coffin lifts, catacombs, all sorts of styles could come under this. You could have the memorial of your dreams because you've got space.
Yeah.
Okay. So we see in these cemeteries some fantastic cultural references, all sorts of things. You've got Greek, Celt, Gothic, Egyptian. You've got, just about everything and anything in there, as well as the beautiful landscape gardening that went on around it as well. These were loved and cherished places. These are lovely, lovely places to be buried, not squalid places to be buried.
Yeah.
Now, all of these 7, the Magnificent Seven, are actually within a 6-mile radius of central London.
Cool.
Right. So that's how we get to the point of actually needing these cemeteries in the first place. Up to this point, we're going to go in the second half of the show. We're actually going to go into each of the 7 individually and give you an overview of what you'll find there. But before we break for the show, personally, my opinion, I find them almost church-like when I go to a cemetery. They're not, I don't find there's any disrespect in visiting, even if I've got no one buried there. I quite like to visit a cemetery and admire the headstones and the monuments and the memorials that are there, for many different reasons. I know, Richard, you feel the same way, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
I find them very peaceful, and I treat them as I would if I was visiting a church or a cathedral, with reverence and respect. And that's how I feel you should treat a cemetery or a graveyard, either or. And I have no problem if I've got nobody buried there to go and visit, just to admire and respect. And in a funny kind of way, it keeps the people alive that are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you there, Kerry. It does,
Paul?
yeah.
To visit it.
Sorry,
I mean,
Richard,
you can visit any cemetery, and just to show respect, it doesn't matter who's passed and buried there. That's fine. My issue is when people come to investigate cemeteries. That's my issue that I have with it, and I don't think people should investigate them. Like, people are laid there to rest. Leave them to rest. There's plenty of haunted locations out there. You don't need to go and pester them when they're trying to rest.
I have a difference of opinion on that.
Yeah, I know.
I do have a difference of opinion. I think wherever you are, whether you're in a house or whether you're in a cemetery, wherever you are, you should treat all spirits with respect.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. But then where's the respect in going somewhere where they're laid to rest? Point is, they're laid to rest. Leave them to rest.
But their bones are only at rest. It's only their flesh, their flesh
Yeah, but you don't know that. Their spirit might be there as well.
Why?
Why not?
Why would you haunt a ceremony, a cemetery, even a ceremony, a cemetery? Why
Because you're laid to rest, and you might just want to rest.
No, I have to say, I have done investigations in a cemetery, and we had one instance where we actually had a medium with us who was picking up on a male spirit who was lost, right? And he was lost. He was saying he was trying to find his wife, and we spent quite a lot of time trying to find the grave of his wife. And the medium then translated that to the spirit, showed him the grave of his wife, and put him to rest at the same time. So we did good that night.
Yeah, but they used to say that wife
wanted.
Yeah.
We didn't pick up on the spirit of his wife. I don't think his wife was there, but he needed that verification for himself as a spirit. He wouldn't cross over without her.
If he's wandering around the cemetery, why can't he find her?
Because I don't know, but you can't read. I don't know. Maybe you can read. Maybe it was that era where they couldn't read.
Yeah, maybe.
You don't know, but I find it very, if I was a spirit and I was laid to rest, the last place I would hang about is my gravestone or my graveyard.
Yeah, but
I would be visiting here, there, and everywhere for free.
Yeah, but then that's the point, isn't it? If you wanted to communicate with anyone, you'd go to somewhere that could be investigated. If you want to be left alone and you want to rest, because that's where your body's put to rest, you go to your graveyard.
That's an alive perception, not a spirit perception you're looking at there. It is.
My opinion.
And that's my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, that's it.
We have very differing opinions on this one.
Yeah.
We do have very differing opinions. Richard, you've been very quiet. What's your opinion?
I can't see there being a problem with it. I mean, sort of, you're talking of these spirits, you're talking along the line of spirits on a very sort of like human level, that they're identical and they're just like us. I mean, are they? I mean, we don't know is the answer to that, and yeah, I think anywhere can be investigated.
I think the problem with Paul is it's actually disrespectful to the living's relatives, like the relatives that are living still. Because if I had just buried my nan and then a paranormal team went in and were trying to get any old spirit, I possibly would find that very disrespectful, because I've just gone through that going through that grief process. So it's actually an older cemetery where you've got no necessarily no living relatives, so to speak. So like some of the cemeteries we're talking about are no longer in use. They no longer do burials. When we go into the second half, some of those are closed now to burials, right? Because cremation took over. So if you go to a closed cemetery, so say you go to an old cemetery that has no longer any burials, and it's an 1800 Victorian cemetery, for example, you've got no new burials in there. There's no living relatives there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as you're respectful in that environment, I don't see the problem. I would see a problem if you went to, say, one of the new cemeteries. We have new one on Canvey, for example, where there are regular burials. I could understand the living relatives being very upset by an investigation being done there.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be very careful in that respect if you're going to do it. So I don't necessarily agree with Paul's perspective, but I do feel there is a distinction about where you should investigate if you're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's clear.
Yeah.
Do you agree with, is that more where you align with Paul?
Not really, but no, I can see that point of view as well. No, I just think, I mean, thinking of spirit as almost like us that's passed over, like Richard said, you know, that's the only basis that we've got. So that's what I base my opinion on.
Mm.
You know, when it's my time to go, I'm going to haunt the shit out of people, frankly. But if I then ever decide, right, enough's enough, I just want to be left alone now, I'll go to my grave and rest in peace. I don't want some paranormal team traipsing all over my grave, going, "Hello, you still there?"
Mm.
No, it's all right.
Mm.
I mean, if that happens, goes. I'll have nothing on goes. I tell you.
Paul, let's be fair. You'll be lying on your spectral couch, telling your minions to go and haunt everybody, rather than doing it yourself.
Well, yeah, there is that. But no, if I want to be left alone, and you get that paranormal team that comes in, you know, is anyone there?
Not much different from the
They
today.
are going to get the Ghostbusters treatment, quite frankly.
But that's what they want.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, they'll have it.
But that's what they want, isn't it?
2 demon dogs.
That's what they want.
Marshmallow men, the lot.
On that note, we have actually run out of time on the first half of the show. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to look a little bit deeper into the 7 magnificent cemeteries of London. Join us right after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back. You are listening to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. You have got Mr. Paul Rook, Mr. Richard Clements, and myself, Kerry Greenaway, sitting talking all about the great 7 magnificent cemeteries of London. So, how are we going with this, guys? Are we enjoying this subject?
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
It's a fascinating look, isn't
it? It is, sort of something you don't really think about, but it was a problem that had to be solved. It couldn't go on, could it? So
no. And it's about an evolution of a city.
Yeah.
As well. Forget the human factor. It's an evolution of how a city, you know, that some of these are landmark places now that we take for granted. But this is how they came about. This is how it all started. And they're now like firmly on the map, as it were, as part of the landscape of London in general. It's just fascinating to me. So the first of the magnificent 7 was Kinsell Green Cemetery. Now, this was the commercial, so these are all commercial cemeteries, and it was actually consecrated in 1833. Now, it had a beautiful lift, a hydraulic lift, for lowering outsized coffins into crypts. Beautiful on the back, right?
Definitely.
Now, do you remember Wilson, who we talked about in the first half of the show?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the big pyramid crappy idea that he came out with. He was actually one of the architects, and Gothic revivalist Augustus Pugin was also one of the architects
Oh,
of
I
this
know
particular. Do you?
Yeah, he was the one that designed the Houses of Parliament. Very big in Gothic ideas. Yeah. And I
Very
think
much so.
Isn't there a thing on the back of the Queen's throne? There's like that ornate artwork on the back. I think he designed that as well.
I'm actually impressed.
Yeah, I know Pugin.
I'm really impressed with you.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, like I know it. It's just like,
yeah,
I didn't know who the hell he was.
Yeah, no, I quite like architecture and stuff like that. And when there's documentaries on the telly, I like to watch that. And one of them was on Pugin. So yeah.
I can't believe I actually said his name right, because when I was researching, I was calling him Puggin.
Yeah, Pugin.
Pugin. Yeah, he's one of the architects. So you know, in this cemetery, you've got some amazing, architecture and revivalist. This Gothic revivalist that's coming down now. It was actually pasture for sheep initially, that piece of land, and basically it was a beautiful garden of death, it was called, in 1842.
Why not?
Lovely.
The General Cemetery Company needed to raise £45,000 to build the cemetery, and basically you could invest in the cemetery by buying putting in £25 each for a share.
Right.
There was huge disagreements over the style, and basically it's now known as the Battle of the Styles between a preference to John Nash, neoclassical architects,
and
the Gothic revival contingency.
Right, I see.
Now, according to John Betjeman, influential men favoured Gothic.
Yeah.
It actually got resolved as a competition for a chapel and a gateway, which was won by H.E. Kendall in a Gothic style.
Excellent.
Right, so Gothic it was then.
So Gothic it was then. The General Cemetery Company preferred the classical style and appointed a chief architect, John Griffith, and his Greek revival plans. But for the next century, it basically epitomised the Victorian way of death. It mirrored the class structures of the city. It had expensive vaults, monuments for the elite, modest plots for clerks, shopkeepers, instantly success, right? Because you can be buried in the style you wanted, how you wanted, with the space you wanted, the monument you wanted. It just was a success.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Only there's 48 acres, 7 were open to dissenters, 7 for paupers. Now, the paupers actually contained 133,550 graves, and each of those graves designed to hold 10 coffins. That was for the poor people, paupers.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if you wanted to be seen when you were dead, that was the place to be.
That was the place to be seen when you're dead.
Kinsell Green.
Excellent.
So if you go there, you will see the Duke of Sussex, son of George III, his sister, the Princess Sophia. You get all sorts of things. The Duke himself actually it's actually been repulsed by the internment of his brother William IV at the Royal Chapel of Windsor. So he said, no, I'm not going into that stinking hole, he called it. Do you remember the vault of the Royal Chapel at Windsor we've talked about before?
Yeah, we have talked about that, yeah. The various monarchs that lie within.
That's right. Now, Kinsell Green was the place he wanted to be. It fitted his, what's the word? Sense of grandeur much better than the chapel at Windsor. So he decided to go bury his beloveds there. Now, the cheapest plot was more than a year's wage for a labourer or a maid.
Right.
So it's still expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this better class of people being buried in these, that's why it became so desirable. You're not going to be buried with any old riffraff. You're being buried with people that can afford it, right? Excuse me. And obviously John Loudon, who designed it, right, is buried there too.
Oh.
Now, the lift we talked about at the beginning for, burying people into a vault is actually in a catacomb. They call it a catacomb. And it's got a catacomb that has space for 4,000 in it. And that's where the lift is used.
Oh, not many then.
That's right.
That's quite small.
It's quite small, really. The Ionic Dissenter Chapel, now they have a catacomb too. That could hold 1,000.
I think dissenters, and what would they be? Unbelievers or something?
Yeah, I think so. People that
Yeah.
don't hold form to the Christian belief.
Mm-hmm.
I would say they call them dissenters.
Heathens.
Well, that's what they called them back then, dissenters.
Yeah.
Mhm. Now, there are actually 250,000 people laid to rest there. Now, either that's burial, cremations, graves, catacombs, and out of those 250,000, 1,500 are actually notable personalities. So you've got people like Brunel,
Oh, no, Brunel as well. Train tunnels.
Babbage,
Oh, no, that
Babbage,
as
yeah.
well.
Wilkie Collins,
Wilkie Collins. No.
novelist. He's a novelist.
It's Wilkie Collins, the novelist, I mean.
Yeah. Let's go with Thackeray.
Oh,
No?
yes.
Yeah.
Thackeray. Yeah, Makepeace Thackeray. William Makepeace Thackeray.
That's the one.
And Anthony Trollope have you got here as well. They're all novelists.
Yeah. And W.H. Smith is buried there too.
Oh, right. The
And
newsagent.
the newsagent, yeah, massive chain now in the UK, or was. It's sort of declined a little.
Newspapers.
Well, he's actually buried beneath a stone book.
Oh, right.
Cool.
He made books accessible to the many, one of the first.
Excellent.
Fantastic, eh? So that's who's buried, and that's like a bit of the history of Kinsell Green Cemetery. So that's that one. Then we have West Norwood Cemetery. Now that's 40 acres. Now this is where Walker had the bodies exhumed from the old Ennon Chapel. You remember we talked about Ennon Chapel?
Yep.
Now he took possession of that in 1847, and basically all the bodies that he found there, he actually interred in his own expense at West Norwood. So there was a huge pile of bones and decomposing corpses that people could see outside the chapel. And basically 6,000 people came to see the grisly sight before 4 cartloads of remains were taken and interred in one pit at West Norwood.
Right.
So that's sort of like part of what it's famed for. Now, this is the world first ever Gothic style cemetery. It's built on a hill so the town below could see it and be reminded of man's mortality. And Stephen Greery founded the London Cemetery Company in 1836. He was the architect and surveyor, and himself and David Ramsay, who was a landscape gardener, created a park reminiscent of Père Lachaise in Paris.
Oh, Dave Penny.
So you've got winding paths instead of steps, so it's got good access. It makes it look more spacious, and it was believed that the raised ground would actually help prevent the spread of disease.
Yeah.
So again, a beautiful cemetery to go and visit. This grand cemetery, again, has many notable figures. You've got Baron Julius de Ruyter, founder of the news agency, Reuters news agency.
Right, yeah, he's in there, is he?
Yeah. Henry Tate.
Henry Tate wouldn't be anything to do with the Tate Gallery by any chance.
He was the founder of the Tate Gallery and the sugar magnet. Tate Sugar.
Tate.
Tate and Lyle.
Tate and Lyle. Yeah.
You've got Sir Henry Dalton.
Dalton.
Is that China?
China, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody knows Mrs. Beeton.
Oh, yes, and her cookbook.
Victorian cookery book. Very good still. Would say that for basic cooking. Yeah. If you want to know how to cook things from scratch, then get Mrs. Beeton's book. She's probably worth more dead now than she was alive.
Yeah.
Maxim, who was he was responsible for the machine gun, so we don't like him too much.
The prolific inventor, machine gunners probably. He's the invention that he's most remembered by,
Now, it has 2 chapels with catacombs beneath them for 35,000 people. They were designed by William Tite and is basically known as the Millionaires Cemetery because of the elaborate quality of its mausolea and monuments.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So this is good one for monuments, right? Go check these out, guys. On this, they all have websites, and some of the, the mausoleums and the monuments and stuff are freaking amazing.
They are, aren't they?
Now, this particular cemetery does actually have an enclave, whatever, however you say that, by the London Greek community, and they have their own chapel there too.
Oh, right. So that's where Greek Orthodox have their chapel.
Yeah, exactly. Fascinating stuff. So you get flavours of different cultures within these cemeteries as well. Number 3 was Highgate Cemetery. Oh my God, we all know Highgate, don't we?
Yeah, probably the most famous out of the 7, isn't it?
And the most spectacular. It is descending a steep hillside from Highgate Village. Now, John Betjeman called it the Victorian Valhalla. I wonder why we start to get a vampire overtone to it when it's been called the Victorian Valhalla. Now, local residents initially complained they wanted to purchase the key so they could walk in the beautiful gardens and become basically a tourist attraction. And now you can still pay to get in, right?
Yeah, they still run tours. Well, I think that's the only way you can get into look round, isn't it?
Well, you have 2 sides. You have the east side and you have the west side. The west side is the Victorian side that we're talking about, and it is phenomenal what you see there. The monuments are absolutely beautiful, and it is tourist controlled, is what I would say. You have to book onto a walk. The walk only has a certain amount of people, and you are accompanied by a historian to walk around it. You can't just wander around in there. You are guided round. And as I say, it's very controlled with numbers. So you do have to book. Go to Highgate website. You'll see all the details on there. I think the last time I looked, it was about £25.
Really?
Yeah, for the walk.
Like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was a little while ago I looked at that. So whether or not that's gone up, I don't know. But it's basically the 17 acres that was bought by the architect and surveyor Stephen Geary. Now he was the guy that actually founded the London Cemetery Company. Yeah. Now he spent 3 years landscaping by David Ramsay to accompany and complement the artifacts that are there. The monuments that are there. Now, the main feature is the Egyptian Avenue. Basically, Victorians had a huge fascination with the Egyptians, and they're in Highgate. They took this inspiration, I think is the word I'm searching for, from the artifacts that were being showcased at the British Museum.
Oh, right.
So this street, and it is a street effectively, was created by excavating 12 feet into the hill and created 16 family vaults. And that's the infamous one that you see, like you can walk, it's like curved.
Yeah, it's curved, isn't it? I know.
That's right,
one,
yeah. I think most people do. If you know Highgate, that's an infamous picture that's out there. Now, in these 17 acres, 2 acres of the land were for dissenters, and rights of burial were granted for either a limited period or in perpetuity. So you could do it for a short time or a long time. Okay. This is the highest cemetery, and the highest point of the cemetery is 375 feet above sea level. Now, that is the level that attracted the wealthy, overlooking London, everybody. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Most expensive area. Now, Julius Beer, a millionaire newspaper owner, was one such investor. He built the most impressive monument in the cemetery for his 8-year-old daughter.
All right.
The clientele there was variable, but it was the most fashionable place to get married. And by 1854, it had made so much money that they purchased a further 20 acres and bought his third cemetery on the other side of the road, which is now known as the East Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a tunnel was built under the road connecting it to the Anglican chapel, and again we have another lift. So coffins would descend into the tunnel beyond the cemetery grounds to get to the other half of the cemetery.
Right.
Mm-hmm. There are two chapels. One is a Tudor Gothic style building, one each for the Anglicans and the Dissenters. And by the 1860s, there were 30 funerals a day.
Oh, right. So they certainly banged them out once it was up and running.
Oh, they certainly did. Tom Sawyer's burial in the West Cemetery. He was actually a famous bare-knuckled prize fighter who had the largest funeral ever seen, with 10,000 mourners and his dog. That was the largest.
Oh.
Imagine 10,000 people turning out to see Ben buried in Highgate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But you can also see Karl Marx. His grave is in the East Cemetery, and that's one of the most visited in London.
Yeah, quite a famous plot, that is.
Very much so. There are 170,000 people in the 53,000 graves, and you've got people like novelist George Eliot.
George Eliot was a woman, you know.
Mary Ann Evans.
Mm-hmm.
That's who he was. She, he.
Yeah, Mary Ann Evans, yeah.
Roland Hill.
Roland Hill.
Yeah, inventor of the postal service.
Right.
If I said Faraday?
You make cages.
They bury him in a cage, did they?
He's there. Henry Moore.
Moore's murderers.
The painter.
Oh, yeah, Henry Moore.
Lizzie Sedal. She was buried here.
Don't know that one.
So there's some quite big names there.
And even today, some big names have gone in, haven't they? Was it George Michael?
Hold on, because let's not get off Lizzie at the moment. She actually was buried by her husband, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and he actually put a book of his own unpublished poetry in with her, right? And then 2 years later thought, oh, should have done that. I need that poetry. I'm becoming famous. I want my money, and I can do that because I've got lots of unpublished work, but it's in the grave with my beautiful Lizzie. So he actually interred her and retrieved it.
Retrieved it. I'll have that back. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was actually disinfected and returned to him 2 weeks later, but it still smelled of disinfectant and decay. It had large wormholes, so a lot of the text that he'd written had been destroyed. So it didn't actually work.
Oh, right.
Those details was not revealed until he died himself in 1882. And a friend of his said that Dante regretted doing it, saying his weakness of yielding to the importunity of friends and the impulse of literary ambition.
Oh, bless him.
Oh, bless his cotton sock. But yeah, you've got some really famous people buried there, haven't you? George Michael, obviously, is one. He lived in Highgate, though.
Yeah,
he lived out that way, down that way for a while. Now, basically, following a decline from the mid-20th century, in 1975, conservation work was carried out, and the English Heritage listed it as a Grade 1 park. Now, to buy a plot today, you have to be over 80 or terminally ill. So they still do internments there.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But you have to have a certain criteria or enough money, I would say.
Yeah, probably enough money would help, wouldn't it?
Definitely so. But Highgate in itself is one of the most iconic. And we have had, I have to say though, I think it has this reputation now because of the stuff that happened back in the late 60s, early 70s with, David Farron. I think he's mainly responsible for keeping that particular cemetery well on the face of everything spooky, what with his The Vampire of Highgate stories that were there. And there are still reports coming out even to this day of a figure, shall we say, a dark mass that comes over you. And it has been basically, overlaid with tales of witchcraft and occult happenings in the grounds of Highgate, which do not happen today. It is a lot more preserved and less accessible as it was back in the day. But it's still well worth a place to visit. It's on my bucket list. I've promised a friend of ours that we'll go to see it in the new year. So, we were going to try and do it before Christmas, but that's not going to happen now.
It's too cold now.
Oh. And also, some of the wildlife in these places are amazing. You actually get wallabies in Highgate.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. Apparently. I haven't seen them myself because I haven't been there, but, apparently.
Bit of an Australian twist to it then.
Abney Park Cemetery was the next one. Now, this was the main burial ground for the non-conformists when Bunhill Fields closed. It's unconsecrated land, and it is located in one of the most militant parts of London. And it was donated by Lady Abney and is named after Abney House, which had also been the home, just out of, just for side note, of the non-conformist hymn writer Isaac Watts.
Right.
It made that particular cemetery incredibly popular with dissenters who would use the non-denominational chapel. So you could get buried there regardless of your religious belief, basically.
Yeah.
And because it isn't consecrated ground, it is only linked to Catholic or Christian.
Burials.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you're not Catholic or Christian, consecration means nothing.
No.
Right? That's all I'm saying on that one.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is why this particular cemetery was, very attractive, because it played into whatever your belief system was, regardless of your denomination.
Yeah, you must have quite a mixed bag of people in there then.
Yeah, really. Now, this is what was said about it in London by Day and Night. He said Lady Abney was very liberal in her religious views, and the cemetery is, with its church, open to all alike. And although its grounds were never consecrated, yet many rigid churchmen have been buried in it. There is an old clergyman in the church who is always ready to officiate for a small fee on funeral occasions. He is over 80 years old, his hair is like snow, and he is a fit companion to such a solemn place.
Oh.
Bless him. He's dead now, probably. He's probably buried there himself now.
Yeah.
Now, the Abney Park Cemetery did not charge the Anglican burial fee, so it made it a lot more accessible for working class people. It was actually designed by William Hoskins, who was a professor of architect and engineering, and he actually chose to get buried at Highgate rather than at Abney.
Oh, right.
There were 32 acres. They were originally laid out as an arboretum, basically a plants, lots of different types of plants. They've got 2,005.
Arboretum.
That's the word. With 2,500 varieties of plant. Now that actually had more plants at its time than Kew Gardens did.
Oh, right.
What was the place called again?
What?
What was it called again?
The Abney Park Cemetery.
No, the Arboretum.
The Arboretum.
Okay. Learn the word now. That's no.
No. I repeated the word. If you ask me in 2 days' time without telling me it, I wouldn't be able to say it.
Okay, cool. I'll try that one. We've got that to look forward to on the next show, everybody.
Now, it actually had an alphabetical tree planting scheme set out along its perimeter, and it has 1,000 species of roses growing on its north sloping slope.
Oh, it must look quite something in the summertime.
I bet it looks amazing.
Mm.
It was later converted to an underground sewer, falling into disrepair in the 1970s. So it ended up having a very unique wild place, with all these different species vying for, it just turned into a bit of a wilderness. So in the 80s, the London Borough of Hackney took over the site with the Abney Park Trust, and it's a park today.
Oh, nice.
So you can go so you don't actually have to go to a cemetery. It's just a park. You can go and visit. So you've got this amazing array of plantage, amazing array of tombstones, and you've got children playing football, and you've got people having, lovers' walks, and so I go romantic when I think parks, obviously. You've got kites being flown. No, very 1950s. But you know what I mean? It's a park. It's everybody can use it, which I think is a fantastic memorial to it, rather than let it decay and become a wilderness. Now, again, it has lots of notable people. There are 200,000 people rested there. William Booth.
Okay. Oh, yes, Salvation Army.
That's the one. His wife, Catherine, actually strongly believed that women should be allowed to preach. So he was a forerunner in feminism in the church as well. So fantastic. So you've got Joanna Vassar, who is the daughter of Britain's first black activist. I'm not even going to attempt his name. Betsy Cadwallader, who had been called the Forgotten Florence Nightingale. She did a lot of nursing in the Crimean War. And Frank Bostock, a great Victorian traveller who survived lion and tiger attacks.
Oh, it sounds like he had quite an eventful life.
He did. He gained the reputation of a big cat tamer extraordinaire, and is believed to have discovered that lions are afraid of chairs, which is why you see the old Victorian with a whip and a chair.
Oh, right. Yeah, this is the classic lion tamer with the chair. Oh, right.
That's good old Frank, that is.
Yeah.
Didn't know that. Then we come to Brompton Cemetery. Now, this has, oh dear, poor old Brompton. Brompton had construction costs so high that it was on the verge of bankruptcy and actually had to be rescued by the government. The land had been bought from Lord Kensington. That was a market garden with no trees. Brompton actually became the first cemetery to be nationalised because of the Board of Health made it the subject of a compulsory purchase order.
Oh, right. So obviously had a few problems there then.
They did have a few problems. The government had changed its attitude towards burials, and legislation had been passed to close the London burial grounds. And Parliament was debating if it was appropriate for a private company to run a cemetery. Right? Going back to Chadwick. He campaigned basically that should not be, and those who were suspicious of investing in death were wrong. Now, it is now owned by the Royal Parks, and it's the only cemetery in the country owned by the Crown.
Oh, right.
Okay. It is a Grade 1 listed cemetery and has the resting place of over 200,000 people.
That's quite a few people.
That's quite a lot of people. 35,000 gravestones and monuments, including those of Emmeline Pankhurst.
Oh, the famous suffragette.
That's the one. John Snow.
Oh, that was Mother of Dragons bit on the side, wasn't it?
No, not him. He was the greatest physician of all time.
Oh, he was Jon Snow. I've seen the film, program, TV series, whatever it is.
But it's not that one. It's the physician. Oh, okay. Sir Henry Cole. Very relevant, this one. Who?
The inventor of coal.
No, Christmas cards.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right, yeah, well, he's managed to get the right time of the year, isn't he?
Exactly. Princess Victoria Garama.
All right.
She was actually adopted by Queen Victoria herself.
Oh, right. She was an exiled Indian princess, was she?
It was actually designed by Benjamin Board and is actually still a working cemetery. It's got 39 acres, 205,000 people are buried here. And you've got, again, some, the founders of Chelsea Football Club, Chelsea pensioners. And there are 35,000 monuments. And again, we've got a Gothic feel to this particular cemetery. And a lot of filmmakers use it.
Oh, right. Yeah, I suppose you can understand it, can't you?
Yeah, you would have seen it in films such as GoldenEye, Johnny English, The Wings of the Dove, Afraid of the Dark, and Stormbreaker.
All right.
So, that's that one. Then we come to Nunhead Cemetery. This is the least known of the 7. Okay.
Mm.
The name comes from the Nunhead's Tavern, which was a favourite resort of smoke-dried London artisans. It's 200 feet above sea level, spectacular views over London, has luxurious planting and fine tombs, but it was a bit slow to attract customers. Probably too close to West Norwood, which is probably why it struggled. In the first 6 months, only 9 burials were recorded.
Oh, right.
Then
Plenty of space then.
Yeah, trade did get better, and then it prospered for 25 years. Now, Stephen Geary, who we spoke about earlier, was only 56 when he died, and was a victim of the last cholera epidemic, and he chose to be buried in Highgate. But this was part of that company, the London Cemetery Company.
Mhm.
And basically, it works out that Geary's London Cemetery Company had actually set 2 sets of books embezzling the company. So there's a huge scandal surrounding some of these cemeteries as well that were under Geary's and Buxton's, control, because they were running 2 sets of book and embezzling the company.
I think that goes to show how profitable these ventures could be.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Now, Mrs. Buxton obviously relied on her husband. So when he died, she was wealthy until this scandal, and it actually left her very destitute because she had to settle just on a meagre allowance from the board of directors. Because when he died, it came to light that, this was what he'd been doing.
Mhm.
So the lifestyle she'd got to live whilst he was embezzling the books, all of a sudden he dies and she ends up having a very meagre allowance from the board of directors because they're saying, well, you had it when he was alive.
Mm.
Now, last but not least of the Great Seven was Tower Hamlet Cemetery. Now, this was actually set up by some very wealthy Victorian gentlemen, and it was to be used as a burial ground for London's working class. So sailors who drowned at sea, at the Docklands, Dr. Bernardo's children, local businesses. That's the kind of people that you would find there. It's 27 acres, is divided into consecrated for Anglicans and unconsecrated for everybody else. And most of the cemetery has corpses in unmarked graves, because obviously it's that rank of people, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of paupers' graves, yeah.
Because gravestones and monuments are not cheap to come by.
No.
60% of its burials in the first 2 years were in communal graves, and most used cemetery is the most used in the East End.
Mm-hmm.
There are some monuments there. You can go and see some of the monuments there. John Westwood ran a shipbuilding company. He has a 30-foot memorial and is one of the most notable in the cemetery. His company evolved into the Thames Ironworks, and some of his employees founded a football team, and the football team was known as
West Ham?
Correct. Well done.
Well, it's
Which
Tower
is
Hamlets.
Well, they're still called. What are they called?
The Hammers.
Or
The Irons.
that's it. Well done. 10 points, 10 points, and a gold star. And a merit badge to Richard Clements.
I'm sure there's a lot of other names for them as well.
I'm sure there are, but they're the ones we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And that all comes from their East End shipbuilding docks and
Oh,
founder.
right. There you go.
Yeah, I did not know that. I mean, God, football I hate, but hey, that's really interesting. Basically, this is a frugal cemetery, right? So even, they're not making money out of this. This is for the poor people, this one, really.
It's more
This
of
is
a
East
municipal,
End of London. Yeah,
a municipal cemetery, yeah, sort of
Yeah.
run by the council, I should imagine now.
Most of those who got buried there wouldn't have enough money to pay for their own personal spot.
Mm-hmm.
Right, now there is one grave that holds 3 policemen who worked together at Lemon Street Police Station in Limehouse.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't die together or in the same circumstances, but there we go. So, I mean, those 3 are together, but some graves have like 40 bodies in them.
Really?
So we're talking like mass graves. So this is almost like the evolution of the potter's field, which would be pauper's field, basically. Now, there were 270,000 burials here from 1841 to 1966.
Not many.
That's an awful lot, isn't it? And that year, in 1966, it actually became a park.
Cool.
Yeah. So fantastic. So that's the 7. That's the Magnificent 7. But there is one we haven't spoken about yet, which was sort of one of the ones that led us down into this little rabbit hole, is all I can say, which is the infamous Brookwood Cemetery.
All right.
I always thought it was one of the Magnificent 7, but it isn't.
All right.
The Magnificent 7 are all set within 6-mile radius of London, central London. Right?
Sure.
Whereas Brookwood is 25 miles away from London in Surrey.
All right.
Now, this is the largest in the world, and it is definitely the largest in Britain. Right? Now, the reason this one stands out was because of a railway. Okay. Now, it was a way of, again, disposing of the London's dead. And you could get on a train. There was a specific railway called the Necropolis Railway.
And
it ran from Waterloo to Brookwood. Okay. So you've got a funeral train.
So at a funeral, I suppose it would take
A day out.
The deceased plus all the mourners as well.
Correct,
on a train ride. All right.
Yeah. It's actually the first example of a tailored, what's the word? A tailored funeral mass kind of scenario. Because you'd have the transport, you'd have the mourners, they would lay on tea, they would take on like a funeral arrangements basically for you. Now, in 1854, the Necropolis Railway Company operated from Waterloo to Brookwood. It offered a crepe-swathed wooden framework supporting the coffin, 3 classes of carriages, waiting rooms for both the coffin and the mourners, and there was a grand entrance hall with a pair of ornate gates. Those gates were originally used at the Great Exhibition of 1851.
Right.
Now, first and second class mourners went up to the first floor, where there was a series of private rooms. Now, third class had a much smaller entrance hall. Most of the ground floor was a mortuary where bodies could be stored prior to their final destination. Some had actually arrived by river, which was the cheapest way to transport them. Now, the train left from the second floor, which was the waiting area for first class passengers.
Right.
There were 2 railway lines, one on each side of the platform, to separate Anglicans from dissenters. You had steam-powered lifts. They loaded the first-class coffins and mourners waiting in the waiting rooms. Once it was raised, they could assemble on the platform to watch it to be loaded into place aboard the first-class hearse carriage. Right?
Didn't they have coffins with little bells on as well?
That was in the graveyard.
Okay.
Oh, bear with. We'll get to that at the end.
Okay. Was I
jumping ahead again? Jeepers.
Okay. I'll be quiet.
Yeah. Let me just finish this and you can talk away. The names of the deceased would be announced once their coffins have been slotted into place, and the mourners for that person would then get on the train.
Right.
Right? When you think about it, how crazy is this? Carriage doors were labelled with the names of the deceased to make sure you travelled with the right person, the correct funeral. The process was then repeated for second, then third class. Although third class, you wouldn't see that your coffin was loaded. That was special. Third class mourners were hidden behind an opaque screen so the others couldn't see them. And once first and second were seated comfortably, third class were quickly ushered into their communal carriage.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, well, we see that in the Titanic, don't we? The train left once a day and it took an hour. Okay, to get there, but extra trains could be laid on if someone popular was having a well-attended funeral. The London Necropolis Company even progressed to selling earth-to-earth coffins made from compressed pulp. basically. Fit for purpose above ground, but rapidly decomposing underground. So, quite eco-friendly.
Yeah, I mean, and people pay extra for that now.
That's right. The ticket office sold only one-way coffin tickets, as these were only for the dead, and it ran until 1941.
Oh, right. So not all that long ago.
I
Not
wonder if many
really.
of them bunk the trains.
I don't think that was one you'd want to bunk. I tell you.
And I wonder how they find them as well.
Brookwood is very separated though. So you've got the poor would not be buried near the dukes, politicians. Different cemeteries had different stations. Different classes would have different stations. So the third class would get off at one station, second different, first class different again. So you've got 3 stages because it's over 2,000 acres of land, so they had time. Yeah, so they could separate the classes, as it were. Now, it was planted by Robert Donald. It's spacious and beautiful with pines, birches, beech, monkey puzzles. It's just a beautiful. You could visit this one today, even now, and it's quite cheap. It's got room for expansion. You could have room for all the London parishes and the dominations. The train made it easy and accessible. The stations themselves were licensed and catered for the funeral parties. Like I say, this was like the package deal, yeah, because you could have afternoon tea for the visitors. I know, crazy. The pub was particularly welcomed by the locals, who were not quite so keen on a large cemetery on their doorstep. But the bar had humour. It said things like spirits served here. And actually, the Necropolis Railway inspired 2 novels about it. Now, the business went down after the motor car was invented, and basically, World War II, that was the end of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't travel on the Necropolis Railway. You can't even visit the station. That's all locked up because it got bombed, basically. You can see the gates. You can still go and stand outside the gates, boarded up gates, but yeah, so where it is still there, but it's not used at all.
So you say there's no access to it whatsoever?
No, I have tried in the past to see, try and find out who owned it and stuff like that, but I came up with a blank wall, basically.
Oh, right.
I got passed around a lot when I was trying to find out a lot of information about the Necropolis Railway, who owned it now, whether I could get access into it, just to have a look around, basically. And yeah, I came up with a lot of dead walls on that one. But if anybody out there has got any handy hints on that one, let me know, please, because I would be most interested.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
Good.
That's it. Now, in 1874, Queen Victoria's surgeon, H. Thompson, proposed cremation as a solution to death on an industrial scale. Basically, it's more sanitary, space-saving. The ashes could be used as fertilizer for city parks and farmland, all that kind of thing. So he founded the Cremation Society of Great Britain, which raised the money to build an experimental crematorium at Brookwood. Now, opinion was against it, but 5 years later was made legal. I think everyone started to recognise that although the Magnificent Seven sort of solved a problem for a short period of time, it was a relatively short period of time, and a more long-term solution needed to be found. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Brookwood Cemetery was actually chosen to rebury those exhumed during the excavations at St. James's Garden near Euston Station. Now, this was a burial ground from the 18th and 19th century. 50,000 Londoners were discovered by the HS2 archaeologists in the October of 2018.
I actually watched a documentary on that.
Did you?
Yeah, there's one on, I can't remember if it was on the streaming service Netflix or Amazon. It was on one of those, and it was like Secrets of the Secrets of the Underground, something like that. And,
I think I've seen some of those.
Yeah, it was talking about the Euston excavations, and yeah, it looked amazing what they were doing and what they they're bringing up. They were bringing up parts of coffins and that are still there because obviously it's very well maintained under the ground because of the clay content or something.
Yeah, preserves rather than rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really fascinating, and that was really good. That show.
Yeah.
And there was a few of them, different stations, and like what was hidden underneath them, and just places where you're not really allowed to go.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
That was going on in 2018, and the last I heard, they were still working on that particular area, and there'll be a monument as well when it's completed. But archaeology, takes forever, doesn't it? It takes a long time. They're very careful with it.
I go through Euston Station quite a bit recently, and they're still doing work there.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me. So that is Brookwood, which I, like I said, always thought was part of the Great Seven, the Magnificent Seven, but it wasn't.
Yeah, that's handy to know, isn't it?
It certainly is, but some of these are now turned into parks, so you can go and visit them. The monuments and gravestones are still there inside the park, so they're accessible. You can go and look around. That's not a problem. Some of them are still in use, which is good. Some of them have got it set up, so you have to pay for a fee to go and actually have a look at some of the monuments. Whatever way you do it, I would say this: do it with respect, do it with firmly in mind of what these represent and the belief systems that were at play and the famous people that are interred there. Not just that, but the poor people as well, those individual nameless people now that have been lost to history, they're buried there. Even so, I think one of them, the Tower Hamlets, has got one of the Jack the Ripper victims in it. They're well worth looking at and remembering and keeping their memories alive. I find them fascinating. And, when the spring comes, Richard, we're definitely going to go and visit one or two of them.
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely have to go and visit, sort of, because, we are not that far from London, so, it's quite easy to get to.
Did you notice it's going to be a train trip, though, rather than a car trip?
Yes. We go by train, yeah. Perhaps they'll open up the Necropolis Railway, especially for you, Kerry.
Well, as I say, you can't get into it, but you can see the gates of it. It's a fascinating, though. I find that whole process fascinating because, as I say, it's almost like an evolution laid out before you in regard to, burials, and then, the respect people were given that grew because of the Great Seven. Because he was able to give them the respect they deserved in death, whether or not you're a poor or a rich person. You know what I mean? And it shows the classes. It shows, for going into cremation. It shows that evolution and that attitude towards death. I find it fascinating.
It is, definitely.
So, let's talk then about some of the other things. Right. Now, if you see a caged grave, Richard, please tell the world. Please put this to rest. It is nothing to do with vampires, guys.
It's nothing to do.
Oh, vampires are so much fun.
I've seen it constantly mentioned on certain paranormal sort of Facebook group pages. They will post it and say, it's to stop people rising from the dead. In a way, it is to stop people rising, but not in the way that people think. They're called moor safes, and they were put over graves to prevent grave robbers from robbing the grave. And there are still a few of them dotted around the country in certain graveyards and stuff. I mean, the next time you go to a graveyard, sort of just have a look, and if you see sort of a lot of raw ironwork and over a grave, that is more than likely what it is. And they do have a name, and they're called moor safes. And what you would do, a family, you would sort of, when a deceased, when he had a memory of family become deceased, you'll have them buried, but then the undertaker would offer a service of placing a moor safe over the grave for about 6 months. So you'd only rent these for about 6 months, and that will render the corpse useless for the grave robbers to come and steal and send off and sell off to be dissected.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what they are.
Interesting fact as well, though. There was a UK comedian called Benny Hill, and when he died, he was buried with his rings and things and other jewellery, and his grave was constantly robbed. So what they done, they concreted a massive big slab over his coffin, so no one can break in there now. He didn't want the more safe.
He didn't want one of those, so he went for a great big slab of concrete
He's
instead.
under a slab of concrete now.
Right.
Yeah, that's the cheaper version, obviously.
That's not rented. That is definite, right?
And some of these war safes are actually quite ornate, sort of looking structures, and others are quite plain. You know, just sort of like to do the job.
So when they stopped nicking bodies, basically, which came about really at the end when they went more into cremation, and also you've got to look at the physicians, things became more accessible, bodies became more accessible, people left their bodies to science and stuff like that, and paupers would get dissected rather than being able to nick stuff. There was a law on that too and stuff like that. There's all different things to do with this that you know, as to why it became out of fashion.
Yeah, you could basically leave your body to medical science now.
You still can.
Yeah.
There's body farms, isn't there, as well, where they leave them out in various conditions to see how nature decomposes the body.
There are,
yeah, and they're sort of like there are a lot of police forces run those, you know, and forensic scientists use them to judge sort of how bodies decompose. Yeah.
I never knew that until I read Patricia Cornwell. She's a writer, American writer, and she's done some massive books, you know, beyond the Jack the Ripper book. She's actually a fictional author in her own right, and she was talking about it in one of her books, and I was like, "It's this thing," and I looked into it, and it is, and we have them in the UK too.
Yeah,
I mean, they're very protected. You can't just like visit them. They're serious scientific research goes on in those places. But
perfect place to hide a dead body, but
I think
hide one in plain sight.
Yeah.
They will sort of have one body perhaps totally exposed, and they'd have another body sort of buried in a very shallow grave. You know, they buried them at various depths to see how the decomposition works and stuff. I mean, different.
It helps forensic science, so it's a thing.
It does, very much so. You know, all sorts of things they look at in those places. Amazing, how far we've advanced.
Yeah.
Weirdly, in medical science, that is, not in.
You don't want to be near one in a zombie apocalypse, though.
Not particularly. No, God, no. Mind you, they're already dead.
Yeah, but they might rise. You don't know. I know you don't see that sort of thing. You don't see that sort of thing in like Walking Dead or anything like that, but you know, in some of the older films, they would rise, wouldn't they? Because you'd see them constantly getting up out of the graves and things.
Oh God, yeah, we're going back to Tales from the Crypt scenario, aren't we?
Yeah,
hands shooting up through the soil and stuff.
And Michael Jackson's Thriller as well. That was one as well, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, Victorians had a huge fear of being buried dead, being buried alive.
That's it. Well, that's the one. They were always buried dead.
They were always buried alive. So you know, there were cases of people being in a coma or something like that and thinking that they were dead, and then being buried, and then them waking up in the coffin, and oh my God, it's scary. So they would fix bells to their wrists. There would be a line, so they'd tie it to the wrist. The line would come up through the coffin and attach to a bell at the top. And if they woke up,
the bell was in like a little bell tower stuck on the top.
Yeah.
And I think the only place I've ever actually seen one of those coffins I think it was in a movie, and it was called The Great Train Robbery.
Oh, okay. It's on Netflix
That's
now.
how they got into the train, I think. They were in those coffins. Really,
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure it was that film.
But those were short-term things. Like the Mort safe was rented, so was the Bell scenario. I mean, after a certain amount of time, you know that they're dead, right?
Yeah.
Don't ring the bell. So they're short-term things. So we talk about them now, but you very rarely see evidence of those now. The same as the watchtowers that they used to have over certain cemeteries to keep a watch for the body snatchers and stuff like that, which we spoke about on a different show. We spoke about on the Burke and Hare show that we did. So go back and check that one out if you want to know more about body snatching and the gangs that used to run. Because although Burke and Hare were the most infamous, there were many other gangs around that were doing that sort of stuff and various nefarious means that they used to do it. Now, that kind of comes to the end of that particular exploration avenue, doesn't it? So have we got any other news to report, guys? Well, we are right on the cusp of Christmas. So what is a great Christmas present?
One great Christmas present that I can think of would be the Paranormal Concept Extra book. And that, you can go over to our website, which is www.paranormalconcept.com, and search under publications, and all our books are there. So yeah, get buying. Absolutely fantastic. I'm also going to give a little plug to Kerry as well. She runs a company called Spirit and Soul Island. Go and check them out. Absolutely fantastic stuff there.
Crystals?
Yeah, all crystals. Absolutely fantastic. Except the one she dropped the other day. Don't buy that one.
Oh my God. I couldn't believe I dropped that one. I was mortified. It's proper scratched it up. I was like, oh my God.
Oh, no, you dropped one.
It's a big one. Yeah, it's a big piece as well.
Yeah.
It's been bought. I will say that. Somebody has bought it.
Oh, bless. Okay, cool.
But
that's good.
Yeah, I did that on a live. That was, Richard, that was a sweaty moment. That was a very sweaty moment. Yeah. I was like, oh no, I dropped it.
Go and check out Spirit and Soul Island. And also go and check out my page as well, The Rook's Nest. There's some gift ideas on there as well.
And while we're at it, Richard?
Oh, whilst we're at it, yes, you can head over to eBay and look at my little store, Unearthly Books, which is a selection of paranormal books and magazines, which I'm selling. So, yeah, go for it.
Some of those are even out of print.
Oh, yes.
Some of those are like proper collectibles.
Yeah, there's
guys.
Collectibles on there, so yeah.
Yeah, there is some really good
check
books.
It out.
Definitely.
And we have to give our lovely producer a little shout out as well, because he has a YouTube channel where he's doing videos called The Cryptic Files. So go and check that out while you're out there, having a search around for a paranormal fix while you're out there. And if you want to find all our information, blogs, links to buy the book, shows, past shows, then go over to the paranormalconcept.com and you will find myself, Paul and Richard. And if you want to drop us a message, then do that too.
Do that too, yeah.
You can do that through the website. So you can we're accessible to all. On that note, guys, we're actually coming to the end of the show. We will be back with you next week with another fantastic installment from the Paranormal Concept crew. On that note, say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye, guys.